So the most basic thing you need to know when trying to make biochar is you have to limit the amount of oxygen that is coming to your burn. So a lot of my previous students have been people who live in societies where people do slash and burn. And when you slash and burn, you just slash it and burn it, and so there's a lot of oxygen going in, and there's a high heat, high intensity flame, and this burns some of the carbon out of the soil, which we do not want to happen, and it also burns up all of our organic matter, so it all turns back into air. It does leave ash, which is very nutritious to plants, but that nutrition is quickly, it goes away because of getting rained out or getting absorbed by the plants. So you have to burn with a limited amount of oxygen to keep that carbon so that you can use it later instead of burning it up into the sky. So first, burn with limited oxygen. When you burn, light a fire on top and it burns down into the wood instead of burning at the bottom and lighting up like you would for a normal campfire. So in the kind of kiln that I'm making, there becomes a vacuum force where the air is coming inside like this, and that pulls the smoke back into the fire so that's totally burned up. What's nice about this is it does not create pollution, and then it is a fairly high temperature burn, but it's not so high temperature that it's totally destroying all of the oils that are associated with this carbon, and so you keep that ability for the microbes to be living in there later on. And then before ash forms, I burn and I burn, and I just keep on throwing more branches and more branches on until my ring is full. And then before ash forms, I take a lot of water, and you want to have a lot of water for this, and I pour it on there until no more steam is even rising. If you leave just a little bit of steam coming up and then leave and then come back later, you risk having your fire just reignite by itself because it's that hot. I had that happen once. And at the end, you get this almost pure carbon, like this, where there's not many other functional groups. This happens later. That's remaining. I mentioned before that it's very important to charge charcoal. This means to allow it to absorb other nutrients before you just dump it on the ground, because if you just dump it on the ground, it will absorb all the nutrients from the surrounding soil, and then there will be like all the plants won't be able to live very well at first. So I use a couple different ways. Before, I've taken it and I put it directly on the floor of my chicken coop. I've also, after I've dug the chicken manure out, I had a smaller amount at that time, so then I just mixed the charcoal with my manure pile. And then another thing that I did, not on purpose, but my cattle came by while I was getting ready for a burn, and there was a pile of charcoal nearby, and they just came and they started eating it and chewing it up, so that got charged very quickly in their gut and was expelled out of them within several hours. So it seemed to be fine for the cattle, and probably maybe absorbed some of the gases in their digestive tract as well. And then another way I used is I had a big puddle of manure water in the center of my manure pile, and so I just poured a lot of the charcoal into there to hopefully absorb those nutrients before they just continue to be concentrated in that area. Here are some other kiln designs. You can see the top is just like not even a kiln, it's just burning, and you can see that there's not a lot of carbon, not a lot of charcoal that's left afterwards. And then there's this square design. I guess it's a design that comes out of Japan. And there's this barrel in barrel design. That's the first kind of designs I ever saw on the internet. And I just wonder about that, because it seems like you can only make a tiny amount of charcoal at one time. And then there's the pit design, which that's the first design I ever tried. I think it's great because you don't need to have any infrastructure, but it's not great because making a giant pit, if you're me with a shovel, takes a really long time, and if there's rocks in the ground, it takes a really, really long time. And then a neat method that's used in Asia with rice is this bottom method here, where, oh, my child is, how did she open the door? Okay, let's, another way to make biochar is to make it out of rice husks. So you make a fire in kind of a tube in the center of the pile of rice husks, and it slowly burns down. I've never actually tried this. I should have, because I lived on a rice farm for a long time, but I was always too busy to stand there and babysit a fire for hours and hours and hours. I did have a fire one time get into the rice husks that was mixed with manure, and it burned for about, it smoldered for about 2 days before I noticed it. So it's not a huge fire danger, but it was really hard to put out because it was very, very hydrophobic when I was done. And then I read that that's very high in silica, and so if you put that on the floor of your chicken coop, then it can cause all kinds of respiratory problems for your chickens and for you. So then I read that and I never made it, but I would like to make that kind of kiln someday. Last year I burned a lot of slash from a logging operation we had come through recently, and and I started to get ready to spread that on a very huge area of pasture land. But I'm still working out the details of, okay, so what's a really good way to charge that and then spread it without having to do a ton of labor. My accidental discovery that cattle love to eat it might become part of that. So if they're eating it, then they just walk around and poop it all over the ground as they go along. Another way is in the corral where they go to get the water. I'm thinking of pouring just several feet of char down in there, because that becomes very sloppy, and hopefully that will help with water penetration into the soil, or filtration into the soil, and then that'll suck up all of those nutrients so they're not doing any damage anywhere. And then hopefully when we take the tractor to just clear out that, then we can clear that out, and then that can become char, which we spread through the manure spreader onto our hayland. So I have some different ideas of what I want to try, and hopefully I can find what works